Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take sources you send us, dig in, and pull out the most, well, interesting and important bits.
Exactly. It's sort of a way to get up to speed efficiently without drowning in information.
And today, we're heading into some pretty strange territory from history. We're talking about a supposed mental illness from 1851 called Drapetomania.
That's right. A listener sent over some excerpts from the Wikipedia page on it, and honestly, it raises some really big questions.
So our goal today is to figure out what Drapetomania actually was, why on earth it was proposed, and maybe what it tells us about, the history of slavery and science back then.
And the person behind it all was an American physician, Samuel A. Cartwright.
Okay, Cartwright. So let's unpack this. What was Drapetomania, according to him?
Well, in 1851, Cartwright basically came up with this theory. He argued that when enslaved Africans tried to escape captivity, they were actually suffering from a mental illness.
A mental illness. For wanting freedom.
Precisely. His whole argument rested on this idea that slavery was inherently good for enslaved people. So good, in fact, that only someone mentally unwell would want to leave it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's more than just a strange idea. It actively worked to deny enslaved people their basic humanity, framing their desire for freedom as like a medical problem.
So it medicalized resistance.
Yeah.
Made it seem like part of a natural order that they should be enslaved.
Exactly, reinforcing the whole social structure.
Okay, so what was his flawed logic there? How did he justify that?
He reasoned that, well, if enslaved people should be content, as he believed, then they wouldn't want to leave. Simple as that in his mind.
So the desire to leave must mean something's wrong with them.
Right. Something unnatural, going against the way things are supposed to be. The massive underlying assumption, of course, is that slavery itself was a positive state.
And the name itself, Drapetomania. It sounds kind of official, almost medical.
It does, and that was intentional. Cartwright put it together from Greek words, drapetes,
Which means?
a runaway slave, and mania, which means madness or frenzy.
So literally runaway slave madness.
Pretty much, yeah.
Where did he publish this? Did anyone actually take it seriously? Especially doctors.
He published it in a journal called DeBow's Review, and interestingly, it got reprinted quite a bit in the Southern states.
Okay, so it found an audience there. What about in the North?
Well, up north, it was a different story. The article was widely mocked, satirized even. People seemed to grasp how, absurd and problematic it was.
But wait, the source material says it actually stuck around in medical dictionaries for a while. That seems odd if it was mocked so much.
It is surprising, isn't it? But yeah, as late as 1914, the third edition of Stedman's Practical Medical Dictionary still listed Drapetomania.
1914. Seriously?
Yeah.
How do they define it then?
It was defined as vagabondage, dromomania, an uncontrollable or insane impulsion to wander. So the core idea persisted, even if detached slightly from its original explicit context.
So how did Cartwright himself describe the symptoms, besides the obvious one of running away?
Well, he admitted it was, quote, unknown to our medical authorities, but claimed planters and overseers knew it well. The main symptom was absconding from service.
And he presented this where? To other doctors?
Yes, he presented his paper to the Medical Association of Louisiana, which tells you something about the environment in that part of the country at the time.
Definitely. What did he think caused it? Why, in his view, would someone catch Drapetomania?
Get this. He claimed it was often because masters got too familiar with their slaves, treating them too much like equals.
Too familiar. Treating them like equals caused them to run away.
In his twisted view, yes. It supposedly upset the natural hierarchy and planted the seeds of escape.
Wow. That just reinforces his belief in that strict racial hierarchy. So what did he suggest was the right way to treat enslaved people to prevent this illness?
Right. He had a whole prescription for it. Basically, maintain their submission. He said, provide kind treatment and the food, clothing, shelter, even fire. Keep them in family units, separate houses.
Okay, that sounds almost reasonable on the surface.
But then he adds, strictly limit their nighttime movements, no visiting neighbors, no alcohol, don't overwork them, keep them out of bad weather. It was all designed to keep them docile and subservient. Prevent any spark of discontent.
And he even used the Bible to back this up.
Oh, absolutely. He argued the Bible required slaves to be submissive, and if they fulfilled that role, they wouldn't want to run away.
How convenient.
He literally said if a master kept a slave in that position of submission, treated them kindly but firmly, met their needs, the slave would be, quote, spellbound and unable to run.
Spellbound.
Yeah. And he flipped it too, saying, Mistreatment or trying to treat them as equals would make them run away, which is like going against God's will.
That's quite the theological leap to justify slavery. What about a cure if someone was already infected with drapetomania?
Well, he thought proper medical advice, strictly followed, could pretty much stop runaways altogether.
And what did that proper medical advice entail?
For slaves who seemed sulky and dissatisfied without cause, which he saw as an early symptom, his recommendation was, and this is chilling, whipping the devil out of them.
Whipping is preventative medicine. That's horrifying.
It really lays bare the violence underlying the whole system and how medicine or pseudomedicine was used to justify it.
Were there people, besides the satirists, directly challenging this garbage at the time?
Yes, definitely. That article in the Buffalo Medical Journal in 1855 wasn't just satire. It was a pretty thorough takedown. And Frederick Law Olmsted, the landscape architect.
National Park guy?
That's him. He traveled the South and wrote about it. He sarcastically suggested maybe the disease actually started with white Europeans, since indentured servants ran away too.
That's a great point. But you mentioned Cartwright presented this in Louisiana. Was he seen as mainstream in the South or more like out there?
That's a key point. Even within the Southern elite, he was largely seen as a bit of a fringe figure. Stephen Jay Gould, the scientist, later wrote that while Cartwright was prominent, his arguments were considered pretty extreme, not really typical of all intelligent Southerners, even pro-slavery ones.
So where does this leave drapetomania in history? It's obviously not real.
Not at all. It's now seen as a textbook example of scientific racism, pure pseudoscience.
Right, using the language of science to prop up racism and slavery.
Exactly. It pathologized the human drive for freedom. It took a natural response to oppression and called it a disease.
You mentioned his idea about masters being too familiar. Did he diagnose any other problems in enslaved people?
He did, actually. Drapetomania wasn't his only invention. He also came up with something called dysesthesia ethiopica,
Which was?
supposedly explained laziness or perceived lack of work ethic among slaves. Again, pathologizing behavior that didn't fit the mold desired by slave owners.
It seems like a pattern. The source also mentions related ideas, like the political abuse of psychiatry. How does that connect?
Well, drapetomania is a historical example of that broader concept, using psychiatric labels, real or invented, for social or political control rather than genuine medical reasons.
Like diagnosing dissidents in totalitarian regimes.
Exactly that kind of thing. It also touches on how we even classify mental disorders, how cultural biases can creep into definitions of what's normal or abnormal.
And fugitive slave status itself.
Right. The laws already criminalized running away. Cartwright just added this layer of supposed medical justification, trying to delegitimize the act even further. It's almost like a form of systemic gaslighting, telling people their completely rational desire for freedom is a sign of madness.
So, wrapping this up, what are the main things we should take away from this dive into drapetomania?
I think first it was clearly pseudoscience, born entirely from pro-slavery ideology in the 1850s. It twisted the desire for freedom into a sickness.
And
Second, it's a really stark warning about scientific racism. It shows how easily the language and authority of science or medicine can be misused to justify oppression and inequality. It's completely debunked now, of course, but the history is important.
it really makes you pause and think, doesn't it? About the dangers when social biases, maybe even ones we don't realize we have, start to influence scientific or medical thinking.
Absolutely. And that leads to the question for you, listening. How might seemingly objective fields today still be influenced by underlying biases or existing power structures, sometimes in ways that aren't immediately obvious?
That's a heavy but necessary question.
Yeah.
It really underscores the need for constant critical examination, even in fields we think of as objective. Thanks for digging into that with me.
Yeah, it's crucial to look back at these historical moments, especially where science and society intersect in such damaging ways. It's a reminder that knowledge isn't created in a vacuum.